The next panel that's up here is going to be talking to that. And I'd like to call up, please, and put your hands together for one of the leading voices of accountability in terms of wine, a lady who's completely revolutionized Media 24's wine content. Put your hands together, please, everybody, for Dalene.
Hello. How is everyone? Welcome to my first ever wine debate, so please bear with me. I think we're just waiting for our panel. Can I start? Okay, great. I'm going to start then. Can I have a seat? Yes, okay. Okay, cool. So our topic is influencers versus critics and who shapes the modern wine market. But Dalene had a very good point. She said, let's focus on Johannesburg, because who shapes the modern Johannesburg wine market? So I'm very fortunate to have an amazing panel of Johannesburg wine influencers here, and I'll introduce them as they come. But for now, I'll just start with a little bit of a snapshot of where we're going. So 15 years ago, the wine world was still largely shaped by printed scores, pros, Parker points, platter stars, and column inches. Today, it's as likely to be a 15-second Instagram reel, a viral TikTok, or a well-placed bottle in a Netflix series or a feature-length film that drives consumer interest. But here's the question. The traditional wine audience, older, well-resourced, mostly white, still dominates many formal channels. And yet, if the wine industry is to grow, we need to not just inspire interest, but mobilize new audiences. Younger consumers, more diverse consumers, and people discovering wine outside of the usual gate-kept secrets. This isn't just about who speaks louder, it's about who makes wine feel possible, relevant, and worth buying for a new generation. But also, I think at the end of the day, what makes it lacquer? What makes it fun? Why do you want it at your table at the end of the day? This panel brings together critics, influencers, journalists, retailers, and on-trade insiders, many of whom wear more than one hat, to unpack where wine communication is heading and who really moves the needle. Before we get to the debate version or section of this discussion, let's start by understanding each of their perspectives. So I'm going to be introducing them. Yes? Okay, cool. So I'll introduce them and I'll ask for their perspectives. But firstly, I want them to tell us why they do what they do, how they do it, what channels they utilize, and then also whether this job is economically viable or whether they're doing it for a higher purpose, whether they see it as some kind of consumer service. So firstly, let's welcome our very own wine wizard, Michael Fridgen. He is an international wine judge, columnist, and one of our most respected voices in South African wine. Welcome. Should we just bring everyone up so long? Okay, and then we've got Shane Holt of Mr. Pants Wine Bar. And we've got Dalene Morris of Wine Menu. We've got Mile Dukada of Sips with Mimi. And we're waiting for Tsipang. Okay, great. Okay, so guys, shall we start with a why? Why you do what you do. So, Michael, do you want to start us off?
I do what I do because I don't have any choice. I drifted into wine while I was still a student at university and stayed with the thinking that one day I'd get grown up and get a grown-up job. And I've managed to avoid that decision for most of what would be my working career. And that really is the truth. I drifted through working as a student in a wine shop to learning more about the industry in France to becoming an expert of sorts in many fields and cobbling a living from doing many of those things, of which writing is only a part. And so the question of can it ever be made to pay, not in South Africa. I've been doing it for close on to 50 years, and if I tried to live off the money you get as a wine writer, I wouldn't be able to drink wine as well. It's that simple. They talk about it being a paying profession in Europe and to an extent in America, but I think very few people who rely on the conventional forms of being wine writers do so as their only financially lucrative activity. Even guys like Tim Atkin, who's a well-enough known wine writer, has to create his judging things, his reports, his scoring. All of that is a form of entrepreneurship to make the business of commentating about wine viable enough to live off.
Amazing, thank you. Dalene, why do you do what you do?
Also a little bit by chance, I guess. I grew up in the winelands, but, you know, as a daughter on a farm, that doesn't mean that you automatically become part of the farm. So I was more in the hospitality side and got to a point where I really enjoyed wine. Ended up having a conversation with Caroline of Caroline's Fine Wine in Cape Town one Saturday morning. And at the end of the conversation, she said to me, "When can you start working?" And that wasn't really the intention. It was more to sort of pick her brain as to how do you enter the industry that I want to learn more about, and should I go and work for a brand or for a farm or for a Vinimark, Meridian, and I ended up in retail and never left retail, and it's now 20 years later. So why am I here? Because it was a bug. It was that thing of once you're in it, you can never leave because there's always something to learn. It's every single day we learn, and that's like intoxicating.
Shane, what about you? Why do you do what you do with your Mr. Pants?
I feel like we have very similar origin stories, but that's fine. I started in restaurants after varsity and decided when I got back to South Africa, I figured I could do it. And I knew I didn't want to work for anyone else. So we started a restaurant, and then sort of to give ourselves a bit of a USP, we focused on the wine thing. But then I got like thick into it, and I took it way too seriously, and took a break from it, then did like pizza, and then when the idea for Mr. Pants came up, I spoke to a friend in Cape Town. I was like, I'm thinking about doing this wine bar again because I'm like renewed energy, and I'm going to do small plates of food. And he said, just fuck all of that, just sell wine. And we stripped everything back to like, what did I actually just enjoy? It was wine. It was being part of the conversation and really being on the consumption side. I'm very good at that.
All of us are.
Yeah. And that's how it started. And it's viable. We're here 4 years later. We part of the scene, reasonable part of the ecosystem, I think. So, yeah, that's why I do it.
Amazing, thank you. Now, Mile, you are our viral TikToker. She's the founder of Sips with Mimi. I saw you've got 42,000 followers at last count, huh?
Yes.
Amazing. So tell us why. Why? How?
Well, I just started drinking wine recently. You know, I don't have like 10 years experience like everyone here. But I remember when I first started drinking wine, I found that there was a huge gap in approachable knowledge. You know, whenever like I opened up a bottle and I wanted to know more about that bottle, and I'd like Google or watch a YouTube video, I'd often find that they used very complex words. You know, I didn't understand anything, and these complex words they used were tannins or like structure. You know, I didn't know what that meant as a beginner, and I found that I really wanted to learn more about wine because obviously I enjoyed the beverage, and my aim was then to just take a personal journey in learning. So I took this journey to learn, and I actually wanted to take people with me because I felt like someone might relate to my story. And then one day I just sat there at my rooftop drinking wine, and, you know, after watching this video, just pressed record and I filmed. You know, and I wanted to take people on my personal journey along so that they could learn what I'm learning as well. And I had two key things in mind when I'm on this journey is that I'm always trying to share information in like bite-sized pieces. Yeah. You know, something
Accessible.
that's easy to digest. You know, you can watch my videos in like an Uber or like if you're sitting on the toilet, whatever your fancy is. But it's like 2-minute pieces of content that people can easily relate to, that simple language that people can understand. And I also wanted to share an experience. I felt that that was very, very important, and I still value this very much when I create my content. In that I feel that wine is often exclusive. Everyone who's sitting here obviously has a great relation and in-depth knowledge about this industry, but if you're a beginner, it feels very exclusive and you don't easily feel included in here. And so my aim was really to try showcase wine in a relatable experience to people. I wanted to kind of make a connection to people when I drink this beverage. I wanted to showcase the reality behind this wine, and I just wanted to kind of take that bottle and kind of make that connection to the person who's drinking it, just to kind of be that voice behind it.
Yeah. But is it economically viable? Like, I think that's the million-dollar question. And is it something that you do exclusively, or do you do a number of different things?
So I actually do have a job, but a lot of people don't believe that. People think this is my full-time thing. At the current moment, no, it's not economically viable. I do have a lot of campaigns that do come in. I wouldn't say that it's enough income to make a living, especially in this economy. I feel that a lot of the brands, they're willing to send products, they're willing to jump on a strategy to showcase and get their name out there, but they aren't really willing to pay you as well so that you can make your own income. And I think that that's just because there isn't a huge market spend to influencing or that form of advertisement in a lot of wine brands. It's not really a saturated industry yet. It's not like skincare, all these other industries. So I would hope one day that it is saturated enough and there is enough spend that these brands and these wine farms are able to, start putting a bit of income into the marketing spend and for influence and stuff.
Amazing. Tepang, so you are our journalist. You're also a podcaster of In My Kitchen, correct? And I mean, you won the Veritas Young Wine Writer Award somewhere along the line as well, right?
Yes.
So tell us why.
So why do I do this? The simple answer is I grew up in a bottle store. So my parents owned a bottle store in Vosloorus in the 90s. And because of that, I grew up really relating to a lot of wine terms, and I could understand a lot of things like Rubicon and Baron. And when I moved to Cape Town and I was working as a freelance writer, my editor was my best friend, and I wrote for a luxury travel magazine called winelab.Africa.
Yeah.
And because of that, I started writing about wine, and I just never stopped.
Amazing. Okay, so now that we understand all of your perspectives and why you do what you do, let's get down to the actual question at hand, which is, in your view, who has more real-world impact on wine buying decisions? Is it just between the traditional critic and the influencer, or are we looking much too small? Do we need to look at retailers, celebrity endorsements, product placement in entertainment, cross-industry collaborations, sommeliers, like restaurants? What should we be looking at? Do you think there are more voices than just these two? I'm looking at you, Michael.
I think that this is really the essence of the whole business. And I'm going to take a step back. I was with a friend who is an antiquarian book collector. He's not young. And I said to him, is there another generation of kids coming into book collecting? We're talking about really old books, collectible books. Given that books are not exactly what younger people are seen to be going out and buying. And he said they are, and the problem is for that industry and the antiques industry as another example, it's very exactly like wine, difficult to approach, inaccessible, problematic because it's got its own language, its own codes, everything that makes it, if you like, a barbed wire fence for new entrants. But slowly, he said, there are people, he said, you don't start doing that at 20. He did. But he said, by the time people have reached enough middle-class income, they start looking at things to collect. And it might be art, and it might be books, and it might be carpets. And I got to thinking about wine. We're panicking because we're not sure whether Gen Z is coming into the wine industry in sufficient numbers. Gen Z, the oldest of Gen Z, is 28. If you're 28 and you've got the disposable income you need to be buying fine wine, you've had a very spoiled childhood, or you've been very clever on the internet. It's not something you find instantly accessible, but I thought the wine industry is far better geared than antiquarian booksellers to the next generation, which we can see simply by looking around this room, because all sorts of things are happening that are sensitizing people. And that's why, to get to the nub of your question, it's not an either-or between influencers, retailers, everybody. Somebody has to prepare the field before you plant the crop.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really key role played by influencers and by product placement. The cigarette industry was hammered for showing people having a good time smoking cigarettes. You know, the Peter Stuyvesant ads, skiing down the slopes, and then when you get to the halfway house, you light your Stuyvesant. And that idea that if people see smoking as sexy, you'll never stop the kind of culture of cigarette smoking. So liquor's taken a hammering, wine's taken a hammering, but what influencers do is they create the impression that actually drinking wine in a responsible way is actually a cool thing to do. And if that weren't happening, there'd be no point and no place for critics, no place for retailers, no place for people who could start engaging with people. I've just come back from the Mpumalanga wine show. It was a wholly new audience compared with the one we would have seen pre-COVID, a different demographic, a younger group. They're not buying as much, but they come and they ask questions. At WineX, ask any exhibitor who's there, it's a different audience and questions are being asked. That wouldn't happen if we didn't have influencers preparing the ground and making people interested enough to come to ask the questions. I think that's the crucial entry point that wine has, and many other, if you like, more middle-class, extra disposable income activities don't have.
Certainly. Shane, do you perhaps have some insight for us about who buys a glass of wine in Mr. Pants? Like what kind of motivates them to choose something?
So I think we get people coming in who quote scores, and get people coming in saying, I saw this video on TikTok or Twitter or whatever it's called. But I think for the most part, people come in and we always start with the question, do you feel like red, white, rosé, bubbly, light or heavier? And then we try and sort of translate their palate.
Okay.
And something Evan said earlier, we don't try and sell a variety. We try and sell what's the word I'm looking for? Style. Yeah.
Is it price driven at all?
I beg your pardon?
Is it price driven at all?
It is. I mean, our prices are very clearly labelled on the shelf, and we do ask as well.
Yeah.
But Mr. Pants is sort of unapologetically a little bit premium.
Mm.
But we don't do very big markups. So we like to say, like, come and drink really great wine. This is wine we would drink at home. We're not just trying to sell something at a greater markup to make money. This is something we drink, we believe in, and we'll be fair and authentic and honest about the pricing.
Amazing.
And I think that's the sort of power of the wine bar, is critics give sort of academic rigor and vast experience and incredible palates, and you guys, you can reach an audience that we could never hope to reach, but we're the final mile, and people come in where it actually converts to tasting and having another glass and
Liquid
having a
on
conversation.
lips.
Yeah.
It's liquid on lips. I know Johan Krieger always says, liquid on lips, that's all that matters. But thank you for that, Shane. Colleen, what about you? Like selling actual bottles of wine to people in retail, what moves the needle?
I think it's sort of been touched on already by most. We can't say the one influences more than the other, and I think all of this holds hands.
Yeah.
We find that we often have somebody that come in and said, we were at Marble last night and we had this wine, do you perhaps have it? Or they maybe said they saw it on Tim Atkin 95 Plus or Trophy Wine Show. So these things, they do look around. It's not like, I think everybody looks at them.
Yeah.
And anybody who's interested a little bit in wine is probably following somebody on one of the platforms where it's on their reel, it sort of comes past in their feed. They probably have some friends who dine out with them and where there's a restaurant wine list. And it's brand reinforcement that happens through all these things. And I think that if the message is like, how do we talk to the Joburg market? And you have to use a holistic approach and use all of these. You can't just use one platform. Yeah. I do think that the word influencer is sometimes a little bit overused because I think every single person that touches that bottle of wine is influencing a decision. From the rape who comes to me and tries to sell me the bottle is influencing my decision that day. What I put on my shelf is going to influence what I present to the customer, it influences the decision immediately.
Yeah.
To the point where Razine is there in the shop for the day, and he's the one that talks to the customer, and it's another little level of influence. So I think there's a lot of influence that happens throughout the whole chain, and we've got to decide that who do we want to talk to and how do we want to communicate to them in order to influence them in our direction.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Mile, I'm very intrigued by you. I want to know how you kind of measure success, online. Like, what posts, get you the most attention, followers, likes? Is that kind of, what do you see your audience kind of looking for, responding to?
Yeah. So a bit of background. Before I got into my job now, I'm in the medical industry, but prior to that, I actually did marketing. So that was like my first job. So I do have, and my first job was actually a social media manager for influencers. So I do have quite a bit of like a ground root when it came to this. It was not like an experimental thing, but I would say my personal journey was experimental. And so by the time it got to me starting with posts, even still today, it's so experimental. Social media is so unpredictable. I could make a video today and thinking and hoping for the best that, this is going to be 100,000 views, and it gets like less than 5,000. And then a simple video that, I just filmed on the couch or I just filmed at the rooftop could reach like so many more people. So it's very unpredictable, but however, I do look at analytics, I do look at what performs, and I've seen a general trend is that if your video is short, if it's catchy, if it's engaging and entertaining, like if it's short, like less than 2 minutes, people engage with that content. People have a short span, especially us Gen Z, like we don't have we don't have a long attention span, so we have a short span. So if people can have something that's short, straight to the point, entertaining, also authenticity is so key. Like they can see that you're lying, that you don't like this wine. They can see your whole entire persona and personality. And it's so important that when you switch that camera on and you speak, you're real, you're authentic, and you actually showcase who you are. And I feel like once they see who the real you is, that makes a lot more views.
Amen. Tsipang, talk to me about like kind of traditional media houses. Do you think that like old school journalism still has a place in kind of moving the needle when it comes to wine sales, wine buying?
I mean, it definitely does. We just saw the statistics just now.
Yeah, actually we did.
But also we can speak from relatability, that we started the day speaking about how people are moved not by goods or services, but how they're moved by magic and stories. And any medium that still allows for stories to be told is still going to be able to move conversation forward.
Beautiful. So let's just talk about the named influence. So we're just talking about rating agents, okay? Jancis Robinson, Master of Wine. Neil Atkin. Neil Atkin. Wow. I'm making up people now. Neil Martin of Venus, I know. Tim Atkin, Master of Wine. Christian Eads of Wine Mag. And of course, our very own wine wizard. Your scores are quoted still on back labels and used in export decks, but are these ratings still moving the needle in the way they once did? Or is their influence being diluted by platforms where star ratings mean less than storytelling or social relevance? So do wine buyers still care about 95 points from Masters of Wine, or are they more influenced by a friend's Instagram? And I feel like Michael has to answer first.
Listen, the answer very simply is no. The high point of the score and the influence was Robert Parker. I was in 1987 in Burgundy with La Louise Leroy, who told me that she got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from someone in America wanting to buy everything she had of a particular wine. She had no idea what it was about. It was the early 80s. She didn't know who Robert Parker was. He'd just given one of her wines 100 points. And she said between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock that morning, she'd sold every bottle she had, and the price at the end of that 3-hour period was double what it was when she started at 3 o'clock. And that was the power of Robert Parker. And for a period of time, that scoring and the idea of 100 points was hugely influential. It had already begun to wane long before Parker himself stopped writing his scores. And today, frankly, there's so much score inflation. The old days, they used to say of Parker that anything that scores less than 90, no one wants to buy, and anything which you can't buy, and anything over 90, and vice versa, you can't sell. You can't sell under 90, and as a retailer, you can't buy over 90 because it's already sold out. That 90 of the Robert Parker era of the 80s is history. Now 95 points doesn't move the dial, and that's because a lot of those scorers are cynical. The only guy in that, and Jancis uses a 20-point system. The Yanks don't understand that. Neil Martin is by far the most rigorous of the international ones, and he isn't using points as clickbait for the wineries. The trouble is that everybody knows that when a scorer's average score is 2 or 3 points higher than the international benchmark, it's a way of hooking your audience and hooking the people who will buy the report and so forth. So the answer is, it's not a gold standard anymore. Christian Eads ran a query thing on Twitter today about the importance of scores. 81% of people think that they are important rather than essential. I think 17% said essential and 64% said somewhat important. But the reality is that with so many wines now scoring somewhere between 93 and 96, it's got no bait value, in my opinion. Corleen, you might have another view on this.
I feel she does.
I just think there's too much noise. 20 years ago, people came in when the Platters Guide released. They bought the book. They bought their 5-star wines. We had a blackboard up. We can list them all on one blackboard, and then like 3 years later, we had to buy a second blackboard. That's how little there was. It was easy to pick a few out of the 20 that was there. Yeah. Then Trophy Wine Show came sort of at that point where that was the only competition that people really paid attention to. Veritas was already busy losing water at that point in time. And then there's a million other competitions that started coming because, and I agree with you here, I think there was a lot of money-making sort of motivation behind a lot of the competitions, and still are. There's competitions that I've not even heard of running in South Africa. We don't even know who the people are who run them. We have no idea who the panelists are. So how can they have credibility if we don't know if we can trust the panelists? So I think there's so much noise, which means we actually making it more difficult for people to know what to choose. Because now, just because a bottle has a gold sticker on it doesn't mean it's actually a good wine anymore. Because it depends also on how deep the pockets are of the producers, on how many competitions they're going to take part in. And the more competitions they take part in, the more stickers they could possibly put on the bottle. And half those stickers mean absolutely nothing. So for the consumer walking into my store who's going to look for stickers, they have a bit of a problem because I'm going to tell them, ignore the stickers, listen to me. Because... And I think it comes back to, again, who influences. It's all about trust. If there's a competition that's running that I trust, I'm more likely to maybe pay attention to whoever got the double gold. If there's a critic whose palate I start trusting because I realize every time I buy one of the wines they tell me to buy, I love it, I'm going to start trusting that palate. I'm more likely to follow it. And that's our job as well. So if we can, with honesty, promote wines that we know are really good. We're not just trying to sell the wine that I got the best deal on and move volume through it because I'm going to get some kind of a kickback for it. That's not trust. That's not how you build trust. You build trust and loyalty by selling honestly.
Yeah.
And then the customer starts trusting us, and then they don't care whether a critic said something or not. It doesn't matter whether it got a 95 or an 85. I told him, this is the wine that you're going to love. He goes home, he loves it, he comes back, he's going to have more.
Okay.
That's more influence than a sticker.
Well, she's just provided a perfect segue into my next section, which is basically about trust and authenticity. And how do people build this trust? And is it knowledge? So WSET accreditation, studying to be a master of wine, you're having an ASI accreditation, being a Cape Wine Master. Is it relatability, like coming into your store? Is it consistency? Like, I keep thinking of Tim Atkins' report, which is annually giving, kind of a comprehensive overview. Obviously not comprehensive, but at least it's something to help you benchmark. And then there's transparency, saying, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I had an amazing time at this wine farm. I love this wine. please go and try it and see if you like it. So my question to you, I think, Shane, if you're happy to help us, who do you trust? How is...
Trying to take the Kali approach.
the Kali, yeah, hide. But how...
Sorry, say the question.
I had a whole...
No, I heard the build-up.
So it's basically just like, how do you build trust? You know, who do you trust? What are the elements that you need for, you know, to trust someone, to believe in their kind of recommendation, to follow them?
So I do think I trust people who have lived it, have experience, have drunk broadly, have great palates, and obviously a palate that resonates with mine. I think very few people can be critics. I think everyone can have an opinion, but the guy who's only drunk fizzy orange wine and gives it 8 pineapples out of 10, I'm not going to listen to him. I don't think he's not allowed to be a critic at all. But if he's drunk every orange wine in the world, across every region, and understands the process of it, yes, cool, then he's allowed to be a critic. I do think it comes from honesty. I think you need to listen to your guest, your customer, and you need to, I guess, be the custodian of their palate. Like you kind of
accept
you don't want to influence
responsibility.
them, but you want to guide them, like help them understand what they like, what they don't like, and then sort of give them a little bit more knowledge than when they arrived. And I think that's kind of what we do at the bar. We have the conversation. If you like that, try this. Do you like it? No, you don't? Okay, cool. Let's try something else. And you know they start trusting you when they come back. And you see them again and again and again.
Amazing.
Could I jump the queue for a second? I think there's a really key element here where the word transparency came out. And there is a connection, I think, between transparency and authenticity. But it's not the same thing. So I'm cynical of a huge number of schools, including many of the most reputable, because I know that the person who's done the judging has seen the wine. In other words, it's not a blind tasting. He knows what he's tasting, and he is really reaffirming his view about that particular producer. And that goes to, if you are on the estate and tasting, you know you're not tasting the wines from the estate next door. And those, in my view, need a full declaration, because it's not transparent. It is your opinion. You're entitled to it. You may not have been paid to write a positive thing or to give a decent score, but it's certainly not an objective view on that wine. It's a wine that's a view that's tainted, if you like, by the marketing message, by the pricing, and by the branding. So that's the first thing. Authenticity can be the exact opposite. You can have an influencer standing there holding the bottle and actually saying, I have been paid, because in many cases influencers are paid, but the reason I'm holding this bottle up is because I really like the wine, and I would never accept to be paid to promote a wine I didn't like. And then it has to do with your inner ear. If you think that this actually isn't bullshit, that it really is somebody saying, I like this wine and that's why I'm promoting it, you are likely to believe in that wine. Because in a way, that's what retailers are doing. They put wine on shelf because they can sell it, they make money from that transaction, but they wouldn't put something, they wouldn't promote, they wouldn't hand the bottle to you if they really didn't believe that you would like it. Not if they care for the customer to come back.
World,
Amazing. Okay,
I
thank you
think
for
that.
that.
Also, just not all retailers are the same.
I was going to say,
everyone
what are we
is
talking
different.
about here?
You two. I only know you two.
I'd like to believe that, our kind of places, every single customer is dealt with the way they would be in a 5-star hotel, greeted by name and hello, welcome back kind of vibe. Where it's very different in a supermarket where whatever the stack is at the entrance, that's the one that majority of people are going to buy because it's like 300-400 rand. And that's what sells. And but that's not how we do things.
But that's not an endorsement. That's a retail offering.
Yes.
Exactly. But when it comes to what influences a buyer, I think price point is really important when it comes to that level price point. And that's where, these kind of stacks at the entrance is important.
Yeah.
But the kind of wines that we deal in is a little bit different.
Yes.
But I think it's important to look at what influences the buyer of a 100 Rand bottle of wine as well,
Yeah.
not just the one who buys the above 150 according to the
Yeah.
graphs.
That is a graphs. Okay, well, that is a very good point, but I just quickly want to move on to Mile, and I just want to ask you also, because returning to the concept of trust and authenticity, what role do you think race, gender, or perceived elitism play in whose voice is heard? I feel like, do you have a perspective? I feel like you've spoken about representation previously.
Yeah. It's a bit of a tough one. I would say that based off of my interpretation and just my experience I speak on behalf of, the Gen Zs and beginner-friendly people. I would say that we do rely on certain people when it comes to creating a standard wine.
Mm-hmm.
And although we are, kind of shying away from critics and we're saying no to them at this particular moment, saying, okay, are they really reliable? Is a 92 really a 92 type of thing? But I do believe that they do play quite a significant value in upholding the standard when it comes to wine, and we've known it has a very historical representation from the background, and it was very limited. We associated wine drinkers with a certain demographic of people, and we've seen that nowadays, when we're looking at the stats today, the main beverage at hand, most popular beverages are your sweet reds, your Chapeau reds, and they're drinking by a completely different demographic, yet they are holding the most consumed wine, as opposed to like your 2%, that's your study wines, that's a whole different type of demographic as well. So I think that both can play hand in hand. Critiques are important in maintaining that standard, but also the consumer as well. I think that they are very much influenced with what they see. Yeah.
And what kind of wines do you feature on Sips with Mimi? What is your kind of price point?
Yes.
Speaking to Colleen's point as well, what are the wines that kind of get
Yeah, I don't have a rule in price point, but I do juggle some numbers. I try not to showcase anything that's above 400, 450. Okay. The reason is that people don't relate to that. The general everyday person wants to see a 90 Rand wine and they want to purchase that. They can't justify 450 wine being more expensive than the gin. A gin will go a spirit will go much more longer in your drinking than a bottle of wine would, and they just don't understand that yet. And that's the type of people I'm dealing with. I'm trying to make them understand the value of wine. What is wine? When I speak and I make a video, people don't even know what tannins is. They shy away when you start to use these big words. They're scared when you talk about structure, balance, etc. So I feature very simple wines, very everyday wines. I do try stay away from commercial brands like your Quinn Rocks, etc. That brands that people know. I try showcase and highlight a lot of these boutique wines. Also, I love Algan region, one of my favorite regions.
Yes.
So I do try also showcase a variation of regions on the page just to introduce people to something they've not seen before. Nothing you can find at Pick n Pay, perhaps maybe Norman Goodfellows, something more boutique style, but at the same time, something that's very high quality but low in value, and something that's affordable that your everyday consumer can have. My demographic is people in their 20s, someone who's first starting their job. What can they afford? That price point between 200 Rand, 250, 300 max.
Okay. So I think the theme that's coming out for me is the fact that there are so many different audiences that we're really speaking to, different categories of wine that speaks to a different audience. And is there really a overarching kind of influencer voice that can speak to all of it? No. Not even our normal kind of media, our kind of traditional medias, bringing everything together. Does any of you have an opinion on that?
I don't think there's a one.
I think it's all small little, pockets of information, communication, having connections with people. I mean, that's the only way to move forward.
I'd like to ask you, is there a way that have you been able to pull statistics as to how many of your posts actually turn into sales for the particular wine? Do you have anything like that where you can have a follow through with the farm, say, listen, I've posted something, have you guys seen an increase in sales?
Yeah. So with social media, there is no guarantee of ROI. You don't have a guarantee of return of investment. When you pay an influencer or you pay an ad or you showcase it, you put that money behind a social media post, there isn't a guarantee that you will get that lead, that conversion, that sale. But in marketing, since I did have that bit of a background, we do have what we call a conversion rate. So if a video reaches a specific kind of reach and engagement, we can put a conversion rate which is between 3 to 5%. So if my video gets 100,000 views, between 3 to 5% of people are like clicking on it, you know, they're buying it, etc. And so that is a type of rate that can be a safety net, but at the same time, it doesn't guarantee a sale. You can never guarantee a sale. However, I have been often told by brands or that manager or whoever it may be, when I showcase a particular bottle, they come back in and they say, you know what, we've been selling out. We've seen a spike in sales. You know, there is tangible evidence that's there. However, you cannot track an actual sale from watching a video, you know, to walking into No One Goodfellows and purchasing the bottle. There is no actual tangible way to track that. But you can just rely on simple metrics like your conversion rates.
I'm just thinking, you know, if I'm a producer and I have some money that I want to spend on some marketing, where am I going to spend it? I want to spend it somewhere where I know I'm at least going to get a sort of return on my investment. So that's why I'm just thinking, do I go to the liquor store and say, listen, I'm going to incentivize your staff to sell my wine? Or am I going to go to the influencer and say, I want to reach your target market? Who am I going to go to and spend that money?
Yeah, like, who can we kind of back going forward? Yes, David.
I think if you answer.
This is the difference between marketing and sales, isn't it? I mean, sales has a very clear metric, but marketing is just fucking throwing money into the abyss and hope it works. So it's awareness versus sales, essentially.
Okay. I saw another question. Nick.
Hi, Dalene.
Hi, Nick.
Mine is, it's actually not a question. It's just more of a thought. The question about the wine influencer versus the wine critic, for me, is they're completely different roles. And they're both essential, obviously. I understand the wine influencer has its place right now. It speaks to an audience that is used to more instant, kind of small type of form content. And it speaks to a younger audience, 100%. But what we can't forget is the work that goes behind what the wine critic does every year. I mean, if you talk about a trophy wine show, for example, I don't know the exact numbers, Michael, but how many wines, how many of those 9,400 SKUs you actually taste every single year is vital. I mean, what a wine influencer cannot do. They obviously, yes, they give their impression, they share it with their audience, but then there is on the other hand, there's a structure approach where you go through a big chunk of what is being produced and you give a benchmark, and it is a vital role in the industry for all sorts of consumers to have some sort of direction. Because unless you have your favorite wine shop like Mr. Pence or Wine Menu where you have a one-on-one relationship, if you do buy at a supermarket, you need that guidance. So those, as much as I keep on hearing that it is the downfall of the ratings and the scores, it is fundamental that it keeps on going, and that it keeps on going also in the younger generation.
Totally. And I mean, yes.
There are two interesting things there. One is that wine shows, competitions that are properly judged, in other words, blind, etc., and haven't succumbed to score inflation. So Trophy Wine Show gives the same percentage of gold medals, pretty much, in 2025 as it did in 2002. That's not because we have a magical matric pass rate, simply because if you are tough enough, the bar keeps getting raised every year. We're making better and better wine. So either you open the floodgates and you'll end up like Platter, which has 200 and something five-star wines, and 15 years ago they had 40. And then you get the noise that you were talking about. But on the other hand, if we don't think that the critics and the scores are all that important, we go back to the other question, which is where do you spend your money? In the days of the old formal media, you spent your money at, say, the Sunday Times. They had 500, they claimed X number of million readers based on X number of copies sold, and an AMP survey which said that there are 8 or 9 readers per copy. Think about it, it's pure bullshit. Because first of all, in the old days of the Sunday Times, there were hundreds of pages of the Sunday Times. No household with 8 or 9 literate people in it, even if they existed, paged through every one of those pages. So if your ad happened to land up in the middle page of a section that people weren't rushing to read, it got far fewer eyes on the page. So then along comes the internet and the online, and they can tell you how many people hover over it, how many people click on it. They give you conversion rates, etc., etc. It's not that easy. And the other problem with wine is that for many people of the older generation, they don't necessarily want advertised wines because there's an exclusivity around wine, and if it's being sold like cigarettes or motor cars, then it's not exclusive enough. So when Wine Magazine was printed as a hard copy, when it was launched 30 years ago, the big astonishment for the publisher, the late Harold Eads, was to discover that the wineries didn't want their ads in wine magazines because they didn't want to be seen to be advertising, because they couldn't claim to be both exclusive and rare and then take out a half page or a page in wine magazine. So his whole advertising had to pivot to what kind of people buy wine, and the answer is people with disposable income. So then he would go to Avis, and he'd go to the hotel groups, and he'd go to the luxury goods vendors and said, listen, I can guarantee you an audience of people who have leisure, who travel, who like the good things in life, advertise in my publication. Because the wine industry doesn't, by and large, advertise except at the very big brand end of the market. There has never been an easy route to talking to consumers.
Well, that's scary. But then again, let's go to the future, and can they coexist? So that is coming to the point where can influencers and social and critics and everything, can they coexist, or are they fundamentally separate things? But I think what we've all been saying is that, you need to be a little bit of everything. I don't know. Is that kind of the correct?
Yeah, I agree. I think just touching on the point that was said earlier is that the two have two completely different jobs. A critic's job is to be objective. It's to throw in those academic terminology. That's how you describe the wine, to textbook describe the wine. Versus an influence. An influencer's job is to put an image behind the wine. It's to give a real life experience of the wine. So whether it's taking that product and matching it to an experience such as like your picnic, date night, etc., versus a critique who objectifies like the wine, which kind of like that terminology will alienate your everyday consumer. The critic's job is to very much uphold that standard of wine, and I think they're very much needed in that, to provide that benchmark, that standard that we know, being able to objectify and criticize something objectively without saying like an influencer, I'll tell you it's delicious, I'll tell you this is the most amazing wine. I'll be very emotional about it, but a critic's going to tell you that no, okay, this is 92 points, and they're going to be able to stand back and substantiate why it's 92 points, because they have that credibility behind them, they have that education, they have that in-depth knowledge. Versus an influencer who's more like emotional. So I think that it's two complete different jobs, and I think both can coexist and they can both merge with one another, and I just think that they're both crucial in the industry.
So they're not a threat to either one. I think everyone lives together.
I think there's a common goal. We're trying to get people to drink grape juice, right?
Yeah.
Don't
drink
go to beer.
better, drink more.
Don't do spirits. Please come to the wine side of things, and if that takes multiple voices.
We have a question.
Thanks, David. Hi, Dalene.
Hi.
So I think from a critic and an influencer point of view, and I'm on the other spectrum from what most people have said here, is that I think the influencers are the new critics. A critic is someone who gives an opinion on a product from their viewpoint, whether they have the technical ability or not, and that's the beauty about social media, as long as you're authentic. So going back to what Misha was saying, if you're able to post something with your opinion to your target market is the key thing. I think we're trying a blanket approach, and in some of the breakaway rooms that we had today, the issue is that the blanket approach is not working. We are individuals, and especially with the Smarties box of South Africa, we all want to be represented in some shape or form. So her followers, let's say Shane had 100,000 followers on social media, he'd have different people altogether. And so different people altogether, and whether, not even on color lines, it could be on cultural lines. It could be the fact that, I don't know, he likes to paraglide, for example, and Misha prefers cycling. Whatever the differences are, that's how we get the people to be closer to us. The other challenge I think that we're going through overall, there's no exam, is more focusing, I think, from an ROI point of view. There is ROI. Our issue in measuring the ROI is that we want it to be instant. So it's not, if you're going to do the social media route, whether it's influencers and people associated with it, you need to give it, one, the time, the length of time to be able to run and convert people, but know that you're in an equity building game. And know that you'll have to redo it to remind the consumer of a new product that they've learned. It's like riding a bicycle.
Thank you, Mr. Pisang.
Thank you.
Dalene, can I quickly say something? Oh, sorry. Hi.
No, please go ahead. I'll wait.
I just think that we must remember we're selling a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's what the influencers are good at, because they can sort of show that lifestyle, which a critic with a score maybe gives the influencer actually some content to use. Because you can now go and say, like, the reason why I need to listen to Michael's score is because this, and here I have the bottle, and this is part of the lifestyle. That's, at the end of the day, what we're doing. We're selling lifestyle.
Yes. You've actually touched on a point I wanted to make. Hi, and thank you for this opportunity. I think we have a unique chance here of, don't try to separate who's better than who and who's believable and all of that. I think South Africa is very good at trying to find what the separation is. The point of the matter is we need to do a category job, and a category job is you've got wine as a category. So if everyone in this room cares about the category and says we want to grow the consumption of wine, then that's what we're doing, and everybody's got to work towards that piece. And then down the line, people will find, what of the category they like. People will promote what of the, different regions, different varieties, and so forth. But I think that there's value in, Michael and Mihle spending time, because Michael needs to understand what Mihle is about, and vice versa. I think it's not a case of one selling this piece and one selling the other piece. I think there's valuable knowledge between everybody, whether it's Tsabang's way of having written about wine all these years has been incredible. And I think Mihle's audience needs to learn the terms so they can spread the word. That's how the thing happens.
I think John Seckham said to me the other day, he was like, there is a barrier to entry for fine wine. We can't get around that. We can't simplify and completely lose that. We just need to, engage people and get them to be interested enough to ask the questions, to want to ask the questions, to, to move forward. And I think fundamentally what we're doing here today is the point. Them talking to each other, having this conversation, understanding the different points of view, and understanding that we're stronger together, and that, it's not really a competition. It's rather, kind of putting all of these forces together and going out into the world and bringing those people back to South African wine. And I think that's the exciting thing for me. So I don't know if you guys agree with that.
No, I agree that it's definitely a symbiotic relationship. I think the one can feed the other, but it also takes mutual respect, that the one needs to understand where the other's perspective is. And also, we also need to understand that we don't understand everything. At the end of the day, it's the consumer who makes the decision, or the reader, or the radio listener, or the TikTok viewer. They're the people with the power at the end of the day. We're not influencing them as much as we think we are.
Amazing. Yes.
I think we've also forgotten the fact that time never stood still. It's not standing still now, and it certainly never stood still before. So the generation kind of before I became interested in wine were basically a bunch of old Brits who were very clubby, went fly fishing together, and wrote, I have to say, quite entertaining drivel about the wines that they were drinking. It was a bit they drank Bordeaux and Burgundy, and they were members of clubs, and they wrote really entertaining things like The Complete Imbiber, which was an annual magazine thing that got bound up into book form. There were no one really writing about wine. There were no wine columns in the newspapers in the 1950s and 1960s. It just didn't happen. And then things changed quite dramatically. Along comes Hugh Johnson, Robert Parker, Jancis Robinson. It's the generation of the critic and the wine column. And in the 1980s, you couldn't run a print publication in South Africa if you didn't have a wine columnist. It was like the most important thing for a newspaper was not just leisure, dining out, it was the wine column. And there was a shortage of people who were competent enough to do the job, who knew about wine and could write about it. And so it was the great time to be a wine columnist. I mean, at one stage I wrote a weekly column for Business Day, the Financial Mail, the Mail and Guardian, and someone else. Well, no one else doing the work, and I was just churning out the same old drivel. But the point is that we've moved on. The newspapers don't have the influence they used to have. The magazines don't have the influence. The market is changing in front of our eyes. There are no absolutes, and we do need to pivot. We do need to understand what drives interest and consumption. They are two different things. And I'm very clear in my mind that without the new media, which is only half a matter of influences, the interest won't be there. And turning that interest into consumption is not a direct correlation between how many likes on an Instagram or whatever post. It's about what induces people to believe enough at the right price point and to become more and more interested in consuming wine in their own time. Not just in pretty pictures taken at WineX, but as something that becomes part of their being, that they enjoy the world of wine and engage with it. I don't think we're struggling as much as we like to think we are, but we are definitely in transition. I saw a hand at the back there from
Gavin.
Gavin wants to.
So I've got a question for the influencers, and it's a difficult one, I think. If we're going to influence at scale, which is what's needed for the whole wine category, how are we going to do that by avoiding the wines that are freely available in supermarkets and retail? So it's a bit of a contradiction, because the most interesting stuff to talk about is the unique wines, the hard-to-find wines, small batch. But the reality is we need people to switch from other drinks to wine, and we need to influence at scale. So I'd love some ideas on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we need to give huge importance to our commercial wines. They play a huge, huge role in getting people to drink wine. You know, they're the entry-level wines. I remember when I was first starting to drink wine, I'm like, what should I pick up, you know? And it's a spear bottle. And that's far beyond you even thinking about, like, your Saudi wines, etc., you know? It's your entry-level people that get you there. It's the big brands with big coins that put the marketing out there, do the branding, you know, like they get people talking about wine. And I think that they're very important in that role, and at least putting people, or having people put their step into the door, you know. And then from there now, I think it's the boutique wines or the smaller wine farms' job to be more innovative now. You need to start looking at, okay, this is a commercial brand, and, you know, their wine is entry-level wine. We sell better quality and higher quality wine on this. We need to start thinking innovatively in who our consumer is, how they like, and how can we reach out to them. So, for example, start having upsells. I mentioned this in a group earlier, is that if wine farms could start having upsells, if you're going to go buy a GHD straightener, you're going to buy a straightener, but they're going to upsell you like a heat protector, shiny hairspray, etc. If wine farms could just introduce like cool stuff that relates to Gen Zs, like we want to see cool bottle stoppers, we want to see cool glasses, like does it have a petal on it? Like we want to see something funky that we relate to. So if you're searching something, you know, it's an opportunity, like if they see that glass, opportunity for them to click onto your website, see something that they've never seen before, get introduced to your brand, but knowing that they at least have some back knowledge already of a prior wine brand. So I think that we need these entry-level wines. They get people stepping into the door, but the boutique wines need to start thinking a bit more innovatively on how to get people now to keep drinking their wines and how to relate to these different consumers, especially the newer consumers.
But I also think that the response is the power of the platform. I think it's the same as any good magazine. When you paginate it, you have different sections. Some of them are easy walkthroughs, and some of them are more complex. Some of them are more dense, longer pages to read, and so forth. I think the people that create these Instagram and TikTok pages need to believe in the power of their platforms enough to want to do 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories or 7 posts about things that maybe are not bringing them the big budgets that they are looking for. That it's not somebody that flew them down to the Cape. It's not a free lunch that they had. It's something they genuinely went out there and sought themselves.
Authenticity. And merch. I love merch.
Dalene, can I quickly answer
Yes.
Gavin? Gavin, I think when it comes to bigger brands, bigger volume, and how do we get the influencers to influence people to get there? And I think collaboration is what's necessary, because somebody like a Checkers needs to speak to somebody like a Mimi and say, like, right, we want you to tell people that they can get the wine from us. So the big brand needs to make the connection as to where do I want to stock my wine and how am I going to get the people there, and use whoever they need to use to get the people there. Not just her telling them about the wine, they need to know where to get it. So you literally need to take the donkey to the water.
I'm saying it's not the ideal, if you want to be like a serious wine influencer, to be seen to be promoting Spear through Checkers or whatever.
But if you want to be paid, and if you want this to monetize this, you're going to have to do that.
But I believe that, in that case, that's when, because the industry is not as saturated, there's not as many people to represent wine in this space. You know, if you look at a makeup artist, I'm going to look at a makeup artist closer to my skin tone. You're going to look at a makeup artist closer to your skin tone. We don't have that variation yet in wine, which is why it's so important that we have a few people who are still in the influencing side of wine, but they have to use a level of discernment and say no to certain deals. It's not just about the coin, but what can offer value for money. You know, I've turned down deals with these commercial brands that are sitting at the bottom tier selling numbers, but I'm like, what messaging do I want to portray to people, and how do I want to communicate and be seen in the wine industry? You know, if I'm promoting 4th Street, you're not going to take me seriously when I say that, you know, Asari wine is the best wine I've ever tasted, because, you know, I've said 4th Street is amazing because I wanted to get paid for it. So these influencers also have a responsibility to practice discernment, to practice authenticity, and also leverage themselves in the market and see, like, and have a standpoint on how do they want to be seen, what messaging do they want to come across as well.
You're one of the good ones.
Exactly. Okay, one more question, I think, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. So, I hate marks. So just going back to this whole thing about influencers and the question that was asked there, is the fact that we are still keeping this an exclusive thing. Because if the influencers are only doing the boutique wineries, who probably want to stay exclusive and don't want 100,000 people knowing about them, because they don't have the capacity to deal with 100,000 people and would rather just deal with a couple of people on the side because they enjoy making wine, we are keeping this entire industry an exclusive industry, because you're saying you don't want to market the 4th Street or the Niederbergs or the Spears because they're paying you for it. Yes, but they're the people who are trying to bring the percentage of beer drinkers, gin drinkers, and whiskey drinkers over to the wine side. So you've got to have those influencers are doing that. Because 100%. If you're just keeping it an exclusive thing, and there are 100,000 of you that are doing this, because the influencers across Instagram and TikTok and all these bloody things, and I'm still young enough to say that, the fact of the matter is that there are so many influencers telling me about wine that I switch it off. I don't want to know what an influencer is saying.
So who do you listen to, Joe?
Yeah.
You. No, I'm being serious. I'd rather, okay, so I'm studying my Cape Wine Master, so I've got a very specific set of people that I listen to. And I have a feeling the same way as the critic bubble popped, is that the influencer bubble is going to pop at some stage as well. And you guys are probably going to be working with someone else who's doing a better job. Or, as influencers, you've got to get together and collaborate, because if there are so many of you doing this, there's very few people that are going to listen to each and every one of you. You're not hitting the target market that you need to.
Somebody's got to do the dirty work.
Yeah.
Exactly. and you know, when it comes to who I listen to the books that I read, and okay, I'm an old soul, so I still pick up a book and I still read. I don't read a physical newspaper because they're expensive. I read a newspaper online, but you know, I'm still listening to the old way of dealing with wine, and I'm not listening to the influencers. I'm sorry, I'm just not, because there's so many of them.
I think the biggest way that we've influenced how people spend their money with us, how we have converted people from buying the same bottle of Sauvignon Blanc every week to drinking more broad and to experiment, is through events that we do. And our events is not the size event, it's 30 people in a room where they engage with a winemaker, they get the story directly, and you build a family of people who, and then the winemakers come back every year, and they're like, welcome back, and they're like, last year when we were here, and then you start building this thing of where people are in a safe space, where it's a small enough group, and people can learn and ask questions, and this is everybody here from Cape Town. Joburg is the nicest place to do wine tastings. People here don't mind asking questions. They ask, granite, what the hell is granite? They will ask you the silliest question, and they all walk away better informed than they were when they arrived, because they were willing to ask the silly question. And they, in general, so maybe that's the demographic we serve, are people in the corporate industry. That's bankers, it's whatever it is. And they are used to gathering data on a daily basis and processing it and making decisions from that. We are giving them the data. We need to give them that data so they can make informed decisions. That's what we do. So, I think that for us, we found that the most effective way of bringing that data across is through these small weekly events of learning.
Okay. Well, guys, I think we need to wrap up now. So I think a great way to do that would just be a quick fire round, that I'm just going to ask you a question, and you guys just answer whatever comes to mind, okay? So the question is, if I could change one thing about how wine is communicated in South Africa, it would be. Michael?
I think the trick is to create the bridge between brand and consumption. In other words, the moment something is highly branded, it appears to lose the cachet. That is what the small batch wineries do so well, and the big producers who make excellent wines are unable to plug into. So for me, the crucial thing is a bridge between those two places, so that we don't live in silos, but that we talk across the street.
Have this conversation. Corleen?
How wine is communicated. Joburg is not an export market. It's part of South Africa.
Amen.
One thing about wine.
I would want to do away with this north-south divide. I need you guys to understand we're all South Africans, and you are speaking to your friends, you're speaking to your family, you're speaking to your people. You're not speaking to another race, you're not speaking to another language, you're speaking to your own people. Speak to them the way you want them to speak to you. Joburg is not another country. It really isn't. We're just the same people. We just work a little hard out here. But yeah, and it has changed. I have to add to that, though. When I got here 13 years ago, the divide was huge. No winemakers came up to launch their wines, a new release up in Joburg, ever. They flew the same 3 people down. Michael was usually one of them. Down for the event on the farm and launching a thing. And us in Joburg sell the most of it, but we never get to taste it. That has changed hugely in the last 10 years, but there's still a lot that can be done. There's a lot of that can be done. Now we can't throw the same party as the Swartland in Joburg. We've tried. It doesn't work. To have a Swartland party, you've got to go to the Swartland. Do that. We as Joburgers need to stop wanting everything to come to us on a silver platter. Get into that airplane. It's not that expensive. You can do it twice a year, and you can go make a week of it, and go and visit these farms. so that you can speak from a point of knowledge and not a point of the rep who came to you and poured wine in your glass and said, this is what it tastes like. That's not how you sell wine. Go and get yourself educated.
Thank you, Dalene. Jane.
Completely forgotten the question. But
Okay, the question, I'll repeat
it.
it.
Change one thing about wine.
If you could change one thing about how wine is communicated in South Africa, it would be... Kali.
Ideally, I mean, I would hate that you care. I would like people to stop coming with preconceptions. I'm here to look for a high-scoring wine. I'm here to look for a certain producer. I'm here to look for a certain flavor profile. I would love it if they just came in and said, let's start somewhere. Here's your first glass, and then let's talk.
Okay. Beautiful. Mile?
What I would change is, I think I definitely want to break that wall of exclusivity and make wine more inclusive. I know it probably feels like everyone in this room that wine is inclusive, but it really isn't if you don't know. Just to make wine a lot more relatable and approachable, for it to have a lot more accessible knowledge roots, like, a lot more videos that speak simple terms, everyday simple language,
break it down.
Yeah, break down a lot of those harsh walls and those harsh terminologies that we have, something a bit more approachable, friendly, easy to digest. And I would say as well that I think there definitely needs to be that voice that communicates directly to the consumer. Wine, that bottle of wine needs to speak to that person specifically, and their particular experience of the wine. Normally it's like always at a particular setting, a particular bottle has to be drank in a certain way. Like, it feels very inaccessible yet. So if we could just be a little bit more relatable, wine should speak to the consumer directly, and it should be personified a little bit more.
Thank you. Tsepang?
I would bring back print media, and I'd bring back long-form stories.
Oh, man. Well, guys, that's it for us. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being candid. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well done, Delia.